Computer. Okay, we're getting started with the second half of our workshop. Jason has joined us in his infamous home studio where all of his amazing videos come from. Uh, Jason is, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's here because they wanted to hear Jason talk about mandolin. So I can't imagine you need like a long introduction, but if you are, you know, by some means like only familiar with my playing and you didn't know anything about Jason, you're in for a treat. Jason is amazing and has had such a successful career so far. You have your projects in many different realms. I mean, you're teaching at Berkeley. You've got your band Rhythm Future Quartet. I mean, so many different things that, and now you have a new project coming out, right? Where you're playing violin, doing a Stefan Grappelli tribute, and with
Mm-hmm.
Oscar Peterson tribute with piano. It's
Mm-hmm.
exciting to see all the stuff you're doing. And you did catch so the last few minutes of what the conversation was about. We're working on this tune, All of Me,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and you sent some materials. We're gonna get to that. What I wanted to do is basically, and please, if anybody has questions, um, we have a question. How do you like the Giacomel?
Oh yeah, yeah. I was saying, yeah, Rick. So I've had this Jacomel. I think it's what is it, J5 for 5. No, so let's see, maybe it has been 5 years. I forget, the whole pandemic kind of
I know.
blurs some of the years together. So now I'm thinking I did get it before the pandemic. So it must have been three, maybe up to 5 years. Yeah, I've been loving it. It's a great jazz act. I mean, it's versatile, but it's got the jazz look. It's really good, and it's very deep and very warm sounding. So I enjoy it a lot.
Yeah. Well, you heard kind of where the conversation was and all the different things we talked about. So we can just jump right into it. I have questions for you, and if anybody has questions, feel free at any time, and we'll try to work in your questions. I do have several things I wanted to get to, and we do want to look at what you sent, the etudes and
Oh
things like
yeah, yeah.
that.
So the stuff I thought when I saw your etude that you sent, I thought it'd be interesting to send along one that I'd done as well, and I can send folks an audio of that. Although the audio is this is from a series on violin, but they translate great.
For sure.
Um, these particular ones I've played them on mandolin. I've done it with mando students. But if you hear the audio on violin, but it works great. But I thought that would be interesting, whether we get time to look at that or not. But you guys can work on that and kind of compare ideas. There's a lot of things language wise when we talk about jazz language that Isaac and I have a lot of similar ideas. Clearly listen to a lot of similar players, um, and concept of harmony and chords is very similar, I think, in a lot of ways.
For sure.
And then the other thing I sent, and we could take a peek at it, is from a new book I wrote. It's the book again is called Violin Fingerboard Mastery, but everything I feel applies well to mandolin. I have a few students digging through it and they enjoy it. And so I copied kind of half of one of the chapters from that book. And if anyone's interested, they can shoot me an email and I can let you know how to get it. A
Yeah.
lot of different exercises and oh, look at that, Rick's got it. Awesome, thanks for getting that.
Well, that's amazing. I definitely want to. We probably won't do the whole thing, but you can show
Oh,
us like a few
oh
lines,
yeah,
and
yeah,
we'll dig
absolutely.
into some of those nuts and bolts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the first conversation I wanted to get your perspective on, I was really talking a lot about scales. I introduced these ideas of the C harmonic, well, just C major seven, and
Yep.
just basically C major chord, but approaching it as like an arpeggio with C major seven, really like including that major seven sound, as opposed to other styles of music that don't emphasize that. And then the A minor scales that are of importance, like A harmonic minor, A melodic minor.
Mm-hmm.
Then I talked quite a bit about C harmonic major, which I don't even know if you
Oh
think
yeah,
about it this way. But my
yeah.
point
That's a
there was
that's a
that
great scale.
my point just being to that is like a C scale that brings in the G sharp note, and then the G sharp is in all of these really great jazz changes. Like it's in like four or five different chords that you could play on All of Me, or that are part of the song. So
Yeah, yeah. I like this philosophy. It's something I don't I do it, but I not as much as other players. Like, so this, I would think of this as a kind of a scale that hits the colors across chords, right? So that you're not stuck always, doing two boxed in of like, where you're kind of like stuck in these boxes where you kind of shift, but you want to play across the chords. When you have a scale like that can move, actually kind of hit some of the colors of every. You can use this one scale to create more of a weaving effect. It's a really nice strategy. I would say that you hear it more in kind of modal and contemporary jazz. I feel like a lot of the old school players, and I love it all. Like I love modern jazz, and I love old school. I love the Django style, and like you, Isaac, I love mixing it all together into, even if it's a Django world. I just love bringing all the different colors of jazz to it. But it is always interesting to kind of think about the different eras and how they approach things, and what they use. And I feel like they would do that. That harmonic major scale is kind of an interesting one.
Well, I use it, like, I learned about it later on when I was already incorporating, and the reason why I bring it up is because it's like, oh well, okay, so it is really useful, but like I didn't know about it for a long time. But the key note, like I think the thing that I was trying to highlight was that you can know, like, basically if you learn that scale, you know a C major scale, and then you're adding in that one note.
Yeah.
Then that note is kind of opens the door to kind of the note you need to include when you're playing on like all these different changes. Like if it's F minor, that's the minor third. If it's E dominant, that's the major third, and it's the flat 9 of the 5 chord. I like what you're saying about, a scale changes your thinking so that you're going through, you're including more notes, and you're not doing just this cookie cutter like one little shape. Because I was talking a lot about like the basically incorporating scales and shapes, because it's really this.
Yeah,
in my mind,
I think a mixture. Mixture is definitely great. Yeah, I think having as many tools, right? If you think of like, building all these different tools to for improvisation, so you have a lot of options to work with. So having scales and understanding how they fit across the chords and what kind of color they create is valuable. And I definitely think if you haven't done the arpeggio work, it's probably my personal philosophy as far as the like hierarchy of like importance for as far as the tools to develop based on where you're at. I would go arpeggios first, and then when you discover something like harmonic major, to see what that means within the context of variety and how you can use it to create these acrosses phrases. So I definitely work on and encourage a lot of arpeggio work, and really like you said something about like being able to catch the thirds and really targeting the thirds. That is such an important thing, and actually goes back to the way Bach played through changes, right? So Bach would do the same thing. He'd move through these interesting progressions where we'd target the third, right? Right, where the third is the target note. And that's the same thing we can do with a lot of jazz changes. So that's a really important thing. And it gets you away from always playing off the root, right? So that's super valuable. But yeah, making sure that the arpeggios are solid, and being able to voice lead the arpeggios. That's another thing that I find extremely valuable, because without the voice, so essentially you want to have fluidity between like how you play through chords, right? So we don't get stuck just always just the same thing off of each chord. There's nothing wrong with that, and that's sometimes a good starting point for a lot of people. Don't get me wrong, but you'll quickly realize like the sooner you incorporate voice leading, which is the fluidity between the smooth connections between them, and in particular having different strategies. Like for example, and this is something I talk about in the triad pair handout, you'll see some different strategies for kind of going between chords. So instead of like stopping and then jumping to the root, you could go, right? You realize that this chord, right? This note is part of E major. So being able to make these connections between the chords without huge jumps is a big part of voice leading, right?
I was emphasizing the same thing, and part of the materials that I prepared, it was basically like here's a shape. Let me grab my mandolin.
Mm-hmm.
But like, if you can think about wherever you're playing like a C, like maybe it's a double stop or something, that I kind of put these, here's some shapes, look for the closest shape, or that basically it could be one note over. So if you've got like those types of movements where you're not moving your hand at all, but you're just, there's one note that you didn't have before, and then that completely changes the sound.
Absolutely, yeah. That's a great way to just sound a lot more melodic, more fluid, less kind of jumpy, and it gives continuity to our solos. That's, all the great soloists, they don't just insert, lick here, insert, like kind of fluidity, connectivity with the between the chords, right? And so seeing a close connection is really important. And there's different ways to practice that, right? You can work on different strategies to connect the dots, right? So you can take two chords and try to find different connections on the neck, right? And just say, okay, and again, having formulas like up one, down the other is a really good one. And then you can go up to the next inversion and find there. And kind of the back and forth is really good, right? It's a good way to set up your ability to kind of smoothly voice lead between chords, right?
Well, like you said, it's not that the other, like, super straightforward, like starting on the root and always starting on the root, it's not that that's bad. Well, I mean, but I mean, it kind of the opposite. Like, what's good about what you're doing, that's what makes it sound good. So the other one's like there's not like a hard and fast rule there's no rules, but there's these tendencies, and so that go in the direction that Jason is saying, because that's pretty much how it works. You can't just start over with the same lick every time. It's all about connecting it in kind of witty, sneaky ways.
Yeah, and I love motifs, and part of how to make motifs interesting is twisting it ever so slightly. So and you can take some of these pathways that you practice that are like, let's say you practice, and that was kind of what you're trying to target, but how do we make a motif out of it? Well, let's make it interesting with rhythm. And already now you got an interesting phrase, because it voice leads, it flows, and now you inject rhythm into it. So often what I like to practice with those is I like to practice the pathways straight, no rhythm, and just to get them under my fingers, map them out, have some good options. You don't have to find you don't have to have every single option between C and E, right? You just at first just have a couple go-to strategies
It's
that you find interesting.
Vocabulary, right?
Yeah, and then try to use rhythmic motifs as your next step to make it more interesting, right? So that's one strategy, is just kind of going back and forth between two chords. First, just kind of map them out with straight rhythms and say, okay, that's an interesting pathway between the chords, right? And then say, okay, what about adding a rhythm to it? And often I'll sing a rhythm first, like ba 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 da ba da da da. The ability to kind of connect a rhythm with a harmonic pathway you practiced is a big part of being able to improvise, I think.
Well, one thing I was telling them about that, like, specific thing, I started this whole conversation with, like, I told them what I was trying to focus on, what we were going to be dissecting, like, what notes to play. And I said, because there's harmony over here and there's rhythm. Like, they're both simultaneously happening with music, but I was saying it's like I didn't really want to focus, and I'm not saying for you to not talk about rhythm, but I was just saying, like, kind of the angle I was coming from was that rhythm is kind of hard to teach
Mm.
because it's so easy to learn. I mean, like rhythm is like the easy part. You could listen to, I mean, depends on what style. It could be super complex rhythm, but like on swing, but down, up, jump, jump, jump.
Yeah,
Like a
yeah. You
couple
gotta do
core
you gotta
rhythms.
do the homework, right? You have to go seek out good rhythms, and that's something that's super valuable. Like go back, listen to this is I always point out to listen to like Count Basie Big Band because they have these shout lines that swing so hard, and everyone's playing them, so it's perfect, right? Ba-de ba-do de de ba-ba-de-dee da ba ba-dee da. Right? If you learn a lot of those, yeah, you build rhythmic vocabulary. And if you pair that with the work that you do mapping out the harmony and having this voice leading and pathways, that's where a lot of the magic happens. So absolutely, I'm with you. Rhythm, it's hard to be. I'll say the hardest thing about rhythm is to be consistently in the pocket and to execute exactly what your intention is. But I do think, yeah, you can learn rhythms from recordings and extract vocabulary, right? Find all these different rhythms that you really like, internalize them. I highly recommend singing them, like against the beat, against. You can get Drum Genius is a great app. That's a good drum app, and so yeah, practicing rhythms and extracting them from classic recordings. Anything that you find is like an interesting rhythmic based idea is super valuable. And once you start injecting that into the harmonic fabric, that's where a lot of the magic happens. And you can experiment by taking a rhythm that you found and pairing it up with some of these voice leading exercises can be really valuable.
Yeah,
But if you're just chasing the core, like if you're just chasing it and you're always like lost or this or that, it's better to it's definitely good to do some straight no rhythm practice of just mapping. It's very valuable, right? Just walk through the changes. And I heard you doing some of that stuff, right? Just connecting the chords so good. You know, no matter what level you're at, right? Think of it as like leveling up reps. So if it's got to be simple, start simple. But as soon as you start expanding your range, go a little lower than the root.
Right.
Target different notes. And just trying to flow with straight rhythm is super valuable.
we touched on
without
that same thing.
any rhythmic complexity, yeah.
We were touching on that same thing, and an exercise that I kind of inherently, I think my dad, you know, he was like my biggest teacher growing up, and it was something he instilled in me. It's like, if you want, and not even going through the whole changes of the tune, which that is also like a valuable way of approaching it, but the same idea of take out the rhythmic aspect of it, because you just need to learn what notes are available, like where should you put your fingers if you're going to do any rhythm, and just picking one sound, like one scale or chord, and then arbitrarily setting yourself a tempo where you're like, you know, 1 2 3 4, you know. So I totally agree. And then the rhythm, which, like I said,
minor.
yeah,
Yeah.
the rhythm, which is hard to learn. I mean, it's hard to teach. It's very easy to learn just by listening. So the rhythm, like when you have, like, you know where you can put your fingers, like what you have some vocabulary, then that rhythm is going to inspire you to use it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and the other thing that's extremely valuable is learning, like listening and learning phrases off of recordings. Anything that you find interesting, especially over standards, right? If you dig into other people's playing and learn phrases over standards, you're putting your hands exactly where they are, and you're trying to get inside their head. But don't just take it for granted. Dissect it. That is the other thing that's really valuable. You want to make connections between the things you learn and your understanding of harmony and the fingerboard. It's super valuable. Otherwise, you won't use it. You won't use the vocabulary. So it's super valuable to learn a phrase. Like, for example, Isaac. Let's say you were learning Isaac's solo and he did over D7. Right, and this is what I called like the third up to the ninth of the chord, because it's like targeting the third of D7. up to the 9, right? So you want to be able to dissect those types of things and say, oh, the target note to get into the phrase is the 3rd, right? And you want to know the general shape and what kind of color it hits. If you don't need to always have to say every exact note, but having like a general arc is super valuable, because that's also how you can then transpose it into other keys. It's also how you can come up with your own variations, which is a super important thing. Like I could probably whip out 100 variations on that one lick, and that's when you can do that. Like if you can come up with one, like you learn one lick and you keep twisting it to make it your own, that's where a lot of the magic happens, where you start to, things start to click, right? But you can't, if you don't understand that lick, if you don't understand how it's based in the chords, what are the targets, what are the general shapes, it'd be really hard. It'd be really hard. You of course have to get it in your ear as well, because at the end of the day, we should be singers. We should be hearing everything we're playing, but anchoring it in, knowing how it's anchored in the harmony, like, oh, that's off the 3rd of the chord, goes up to the 9. Oh, that's interesting, right? So if that kind of thing, if you hear that and you don't have that type of line in your playing, you would want to like learn it and dissect it. And every time I heard something from a recording that's a new sound that I said I would obsess over it until it made so much sense, and I would be dreaming these phrases.
I love everything you've said. This idea that what your takeaway from learning, like if you're learning somebody's like from a recording, or you're just trying to learn something, you don't have to play it note for note, because like it's reminded me like my whole experience when I'm playing, the fun of improvising is coming up with those variations, and it's constantly like I'm going for things I know how to play, but then I'm like, okay, but I know I want to do this shape, this like F sharp to E, but in the moment I'm just having fun coming up like off the top of my head. Well, and that's kind of that stream of consciousness that, because I'm using these shapes, like that's why I feel like I'm always playing the same stuff, but it's fun to do because I'm messing around with the rhythms, and occasionally I find like a new note to throw in there, but that's largely the vocabulary of like knowing what scale or what shape that I'm going for. That's
it's also, I like to equate it like it's a language, right? Music is a language, so we don't come up with new words every time we talk to each other. That would be it'd be insane, right? So we have a common language and we speak it, but the best speakers are poetic in their phrasing, and they have nuance, and they leave pauses in the best places, and right, they're writing poetry, but we all have the same words. We all have the same access to things, right? So that's the thing, right? So that's what, like you're saying, like, oh, this kind of F sharp to E or 3rd to the 9th, we never get bored with that sound because we can always be fresh with it. It's like, one, we like the sound from like the original lick we learned, we liked it. We obviously latched onto it and heard it and said, I want that. But we keep using it in different ways and keeping it fresh. And also remember, we could come at it from a different place, right? See, there it is. I used it again. But so the idea is like you're improvising, leading around it, and you have some continuity in your solo. You don't really get bored when you're having fun and you discover these little things. And there's no shame in having licks too. That's the other thing. I think people, they kind of say, oh, if you play a lick, you're just copying other people. We all do it. Eventually you get much better at twisting it and making it your own. But if you're just getting started, you have to learn as many licks as possible. That's my philosophy. I have probably learned thousands, and I just always kind of make them my own. I take them, I practice them, I understand them, see how they fit, what they sound like, and try to come up with my own ways to do it, and it's always fresh. But doesn't mean that if I look at my own solo, like if somebody transcribes a solo and they ask me about it, and they see that third to nine, I would say, oh yeah, this is where it came from, and what I did with it is I expanded it in all these different ways, but it's still that same nugget, that same core.
Yeah, it's this thing about like, I think when I was learning how to improvise, I didn't really understand. I kind of vaguely understood the importance of having licks, because like coming from a bluegrass background, I learn a tune and then I learn a lick that I can throw in. Because when I just started improvising and changing it up, you're learning things that you can employ. So that's my recommendation. If that's your stage of development, you're just like you don't really, you can't freely navigate the fretboard, right? So what you have, and that's, everybody starts there. So what you do is that you've got your tune that you play, and then when it goes to the E chord or you have your thing that you can play there. And then, what you work on is that you develop something else that you can that you insert in there. That's, to me, like, really, I kind of like at the beginning, I was learning some licks like that. Then I really wanted to improvise and just like freely just be able to come up with stuff. And I think that I then later came back to this like understanding. Then I had like this new approach, like much later. I thought, oh no, I just want to know as many licks as I can have. Like, I just want to have this vocabulary that's so extensive. Because I would listen to players that I thought, oh my gosh, like you're listening to what's happening, and then all of a sudden they throw in this idea, and then there's this idea. It's so exciting. And so I wanted to mention something. This can be my next question for you if you're ready for it. But
oh yeah,
like when I hear you play, like that same kind of train of thought, like you're listening to somebody and then like they've got an exciting lick, and then here's another lick. So when I hear your style, I feel like your sound is always pretty well crafted. Like it's very polished. So like when you go for something that's like improvising, or I mean, you clearly have a big vocabulary that you can just go into. Like I don't know if it's an improvised thought, because everything you play has like a structure to it where it's like it's a good. I mean this like as a compliment. Like it's very polished.
Yeah, so that was always my goal, to improvise like it sounded like it was through composed, like the famous like when people would talk to Django after and be like, "Where's the score for what you just played?" and he'd be like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, I never plan anything. I work on, like, let's say I'm like recording something. I work on a lot of things, and then I'm very much stream of consciousness when I play, but I like to have continuity with it where it feels like composed. I love composing. And so to me, like, I think of improvisation like composing, like writing a new melody or something. Like you're writing a new melody over the changes. And I think those are the things that I've always loved, like very singable, lyrical types of phrases. And I think that makes it almost seem like, oh, that could be pre-planned or like part of a vocabulary. And so
it's like your natural tendency, even if it is stream of consciousness.
Yeah.
Which I think is like, that's what's fun. I mean, you're speaking that language, but like what's coming out, they're like very polished ideas. So it's like your way of thinking about it is that when you go for the next idea, you're very much inspired by what just happened, because that inherent continuity.
Something I really enjoy. Yeah, I like phrases have connections. I really like. That's again, it's some of my favorite soloists have clearly there's a connectivity to their stream of consciousness, whether like they're soloing over all me. to me, it's like I like taking ideas further, right? I don't like to abandon something if I feel like it's something that kind of excited me in the moment.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like a melody too, right? If you think about a melody, there's a lot of repetition, there's a lot of motivic development, and I just like that type of soloing, and so I always try to. That's kind of like where I record myself a lot, and when the things that I like, and I highly recommend this. And most people, when they're just getting started, they're like, "Oh, I don't want to record myself until I'm better next year." Right? But record yourself because you want to like in a non egotistical way. You can enjoy, or like you can learn from. You should be able to like start to enjoy things that went well, or learn from things that didn't go as planned. And so I record myself a lot, and whenever I'm playing that type of phrasing, like you said, and that kind of more melodic, more fluid, and clearly like a connection between it. Like I'm trying to tell a story, and if I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's hard to make a bad
It's
example.
It's hard to make a bad example. This is so ingrained in me now, is to do that. I still like to surprise myself within that context, but at the same time, I like to have some connections. And I think it brings the listener for a ride. And again, my favorite soloists do the same thing, and I'm really present with where they're going. Like they're clearly they're like, for me, improvisation. Like when I hear somebody, they're super connected to everything they're playing. It's very personal. It's you could tell that it's stream of consciousness, but like everything is has meaning, and it's all like there's a story that they're telling. And so I always try to go towards that. And so things that I practice and work on, and this building of licks and vocabulary, that's to get to that point of feeling like I can do that.
Who are your favorite soloists? Just, I mean, for if we haven't heard of them before or something.
I mean, I listen to a lot of people and have over the years. I'll throw out maybe just 3 people.
Just give us like 15. That's all.
Okay, I'll just do 50. Okay, that's cool. Well, let's see. So I really love Hank Mobley. Hank Mobley, a great saxophone player. Definitely, if you haven't heard the album Soul Station, it's on my top 10 for sure records to check out. He's one of those types of improvisers. I can sing every solo on that record. And if I can sing every solo on that record, it's singable. It's a singable solo. It's a lyrical, melodic solo, right? And that's something I really, really enjoy. So Hank Mobley would be one. Another would be Julian Lage.
Oh, yeah.
So Julian Lage he's also somebody who's super present. Everything has meaning, and he's exploring. He's having so much fun, right? He's having so much fun, surprising himself and exploring, and yeah, it's very inspirational to hear him play. And I've seen him live a few times, and it's always great. And he's someone too. I like people that clearly you can see them smiling, a lot of joy in their music, and they're in the music making, and that's how I feel. Like I'm always just got a grin on my face because I just feel blessed when I'm on stage making music, improvising. So Julian's like that. So Hank Mobley, awesome. Julian Lage. Let's see, it's some different instruments, because again, I learned so much from so many different instruments. Let's see.
Well, we don't. Yeah, those.
I know. I could just go on and on. I mean, you should check out. Like another one would be Borelli Legrand. I mean, he
it's often, such a different style, right? Because I'm very like versed in. I don't play anything that he does, but I've like listened to it so much. But he's very different than Julian, and that
exactly.
It's that, and to me, part of my discovery of like what do I do, like what's my sound. It's enjoyable to like recognize when you hear like how different these other amazing soloists are. There's different approaches. Like there's a whole aesthetic like to what Borelli does. It's just like a attitude that comes across that's so different than like what Julian Lage is going to sound like. Like there you use like words like, oh, like Julian is like playful and like he's smiling and surprised, he's like delighted in like the experience, and Borelli is just like a machine that is just like delivering this like super dense vocabulary. It's like it's a totally different aesthetic. But I mean, he does different things. Like he'll have different vibes. But when I just realized that's part of like when you start getting better at you doing your thing, you can just like hear, like you have an ear for soloists. You know what I mean? Like you hear that voice. It's like, for instance, my wife. My wife is a wonderful musician. She's a singer primarily, and she does play some instruments, but she's a vocalist. But when I started showing her like Borelli and Sylvain Luc, you know, a couple of their projects, and I would always kind of quiz her, like, who's playing now? Who's playing now? You know, like is that Borelli or is that Sylvain? And it's just a joke, you know, but it's like it's also fun to see if she can like figure it out. And after a while, I mean, she hadn't heard too much of them, but after a while, she started to identify like hearing a player and knowing it's them. Like there's some kind of like soft qualities in there that it's hard to explain. Like why does that, like the better you get as a musician or like hearing and understanding music, like you can hear somebody and say, oh, I know it's that player because they're doing that. Like it's these things that are even hard to describe. It's hard to put it in words why it is sounds like this person, but those are the things
like
that
why
you're
somebody
like
is
your
engaging.
ears. Well, and your ears are so in tune to their voice, right? And I think part of
that's
that
what I always listen for. Yeah, that to me is the number one thing, right? Like you said, Julien Lage, Borelli Legrand, as far as guitar playing, I mean they're worlds apart, but what they both are they're playing their personalities, and they're very much they have their own voices, and they're very like present, and it's very captivating to watch them because of that. And those are the things I look for. I mean, on violin, Stefan Grappelli has that. You can listen to one note, you know it's Stefan Grappelli, and Oscar Peterson on piano, you know by one phrase that's Oscar. I mean that's always something that's really special, and which is like when somebody hears something that you do and they can identify it, like that's like when you're like, oh my goodness, like that's when you start to feel good about your playing, when somebody be like, oh, I can recognize you on this recording. I didn't know it was you, but I heard a couple notes. And so
when you have a voice or even a sound, like a tone that's like, I mean, it's enjoyable, but then that's like, it has like an identity, and it is really cool that when that starts happening.
Yeah, Tiny Moore's got that. Speaking of mandolins, like I can always hear, if I hear a recording with Tiny Moore, it's like, oh, I can recognize that right away, for sure.
So, okay, my next question for you, and then we can start looking at some of the etudes and stuff, but what were some of the, if you can even remember, but like, what were some of the barriers or things that you had to overcome, like breakthroughs that you had? Do you remember any moment? And I can share one of mine, but like, for instance, I remember when I was like probably about 22, like early 20s. I mean, I had been playing mandolin for a long time, but like my jazz like kind of started towards the end of my teens, I actually started learning jazz when I was a little, like at the same time I started playing mandolin, but it just kind of like got so serious, and I just like my devotion, but like what I was doing with it, my vocabulary just started really getting bigger. But I remember having this breakthrough. I had a guitar lesson with a guitar player named Bruce Foreman that my dad has worked with, and my dad's recorded on his projects. He has a group called Cowbop. But I was at this point like where I was really utilizing this like flat 9 and sharp 9 sound. Like if you're in the key of C and you go to the G chord. So on that I had that, right? But I heard players use this exactly. So that I had that, but then I would hear really good jazz players, like this was really awesome jazz lick that kind of incorporated that, but there was more to it. And so it was like elusive. Like I mean, I guess I could have really done my homework and like transcribed note for note, but I asked him, and he told me, he's like, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's this idea right here. So if you're on like this G7.
Yeah, altered, yeah.
So,
yeah, that's so funny. I remember hearing when I first heard that phrase or that kind of sound, that was something that really lit up my ears too. There's something about
it's awesome.
that.
But I'll explain to everybody maybe like a short version, and I want to hear if you have like a, but just so nobody can say, hey, show us the thing. But basically, what the trick or like the concept as a substitution is that on that G7 chord, you can think about that as going up a half step and playing a melodic minor. So if it's G7, I can think about going up to an A flat and then playing an A flat melodic minor. So that's the scale that it comes from, but then that specific lick is got this B flat, A flat, and then it's E flat, B flat, and then A flat. You could finish it off in different ways, but that's the sound. And then that basically is like outlining that like an A flat melodic minor. So to me, that sound opened up so much for me. I mean, because like, it's really common in gypsy jazz and jazz, right? But so was there a sound like that? Or I mean, like, what's another example maybe? Did you have some moment where you're like, you learned some like scale or some lick that was like, okay, that's it. Now we're talking.
I mean, I had this very similar thing with an altered pattern early on as well. That's funny. There's something about maybe that sound. It's just something so nice about it that when you start to branch outside of like just hearing the root third and fifth and seventh, and you're like, there's something different going on there, but it works and I want it. Yeah, well, I remember early recordings that I heard, my formative years, and that exact sound. It's great. Yeah. Another thing, I remember digging into actually a Jean-Luc Ponty solo. My dad had this it's called Live at Cheney Park, and it was Jean-Luc Ponty. And there was a solo, like I think it was the very first jazz solo I learned was a Jean-Luc Ponty solo, quite an undertaking. And it was like the first solo I kind of learned and analyzed. I was quite young, and that's why it was quite an undertaking. But there's just a 4-chord loop, so that was what was really interesting. Oh, I get this chord progression, just E minor, D major, C, B. I was like, oh, that's interesting. It's only 4 chords, right? So the chord progression loops, but he just keeps coming up with new ideas over that one progression. And I just remember thinking, how is that possible, right? How is it like he keeps... And then he would introduce these sounds, and I'd say, "What is that? Why does that work over B7?" And I just remember just like, every phrase I learned, I was like, "What the heck is that?" Because so basically, I realized it was this 4 chords, and then I said, "Well, he keeps doing really interesting stuff on top of it," and so I dug into that and learned so much from doing that. That was yeah, what's it called? I'll write the song if you're curious. The song was Jean-Luc Ponty Between Sea and Sky. And then I was going to say in the comments, I think some folks want to dig into some of these etudes.
Yeah, let's do it. I'm responding, to Mike Fox. I'm emailing now.
Okay, cool. But yeah, so it sounds like, as far as what we have, I mean, we have a lot of things in common, but just this idea of like you hear something, you're listening, you hear something and you get excited about it, right? There's something about it that you just need to have into your playing. And so that's something that's so important. I think any great improviser is really excited about different color, different sounds, and when you learn it and it starts to like make sense, and you start to figure out where to use it, like that altered thing you mentioned, and you say, oh, okay, that's like a 5-1. 5-1s happen all the time.
Well, and
this is going to be super valuable, and I want this. I can use this a lot.
Well, and another like kind of element to that lick that I shared, that altered lick, is that as the structure of that lick is not that like unusual. Like you could play something like in the key of C minor. It's just like a normal kind of sounding C minor.
Yeah, well,
right?
it's also it's like the
goes to F minor. Yeah. Yeah, like it's
like the
common,
Michael Bolton song.
kind of like common language, and then maybe you go to F minor.
Yeah.
But then knowing that, when it goes to G7, what's really happening, because it helps you organize it and then reproduce it in different contexts. So then
I think of it exactly the same way. Like I think of that as an A flat melodic minor. It's like that sound. That it's like the hand shape of A melodic minor. Absolutely for the G. It's a G altered scale. A flat melodic minor. But you don't just want to just play it up and down. You have to understand how to get into it. That's such an important thing. And so knowing like this, that what we talked about, like kind of learning something and getting into it, anchoring it, is super valuable. This thing, A flat melodic minor, but it's over the G7. It's actually the sharp 9. So anyway, things to think about. Really, really. That's a good. I remember getting excited about that exact sound in a Jean-Luc Ponty solo, and then I was hearing, I heard Didier Lockwood do it, and then I was hearing a lot of guitar players do it as well.
Yeah. Then you realize, wait, everybody does this lick, but it's part of the language. It's
exactly. So
what do you want to start with as far like what do you want to show us from your materials?
So I think what I'll do is talk through a little bit of the triad pairs from the book, just a little sampling of what's going on. Maybe we could try a couple of these things. Just some explaining a little bit of their use and some of their values and how to work on it. And then we could take a peek at the etude, and I could show a couple phrases. Like I don't know if we'll have time to do like the entire etude, I would like to pick out a couple phrases and break them down and show them to you and explain some of like how I'd come up with those types of phrases. But yeah, let's look at the triad pairs first.
And we did have a question from John. He says when we start asking questions, he said the book is great and I love the triad pairs over the dominant chord. Can you demonstrate some triad pairs over a minor chord? So maybe you could take us in that direction too.
Sure, yeah. I would say right off the bat, to answer that question, they're triad pairs. There's a lot of different things you can do with them, but dominant chords is definitely the most prominent. So do you want me to pull it up on my side?
Well, I was thinking if everybody has it, can you just narrate where, or I can open it. I'll open it. We'll do it that way. So triad pairs.
Okay.
Because I'm recording. I'm recording, so it'll be my screen.
Oh yeah, cool.
Let me do share screen.
So the concept of triad pairs is simple. You're pairing two different triads, so two different root third fifths of two different chords. And so you can go down a little bit, and let's look at these first. Let's just look at the what I say, like these three phases, and so go up a little bit. So page 1, you have these three phases. I'm trying to
make it get this stuff out of the way.
Cool. Yeah, you should be able to also just share this one. Instead of your home screen, share this one document.
How do I do that?
Yeah.
That's share?
I mean, it's okay right now. But when you do it, you can, when you click share screen, there's like an option for just the document.
Oh, okay. Well, then let me...
If you want to do that. But it looks good right now. It looks good on my end. If you just go up to the first page, we're okay.
Is it working? Okay, so the first
Yeah,
up
looks
here.
all good here. Okay, so yeah, I want to see these phases. So you can go down a little bit. So phase one. So first off, the first triad that we're going to talk about is taking, and this is over a G7 chord. So G7, right? And the two triads are G and F, right? So those are them in root position. But when you start to pair them and play them together, you get a lot of different things. But there's three main phases of what you get out of practicing these, because it's not just, there's a lot. It's not just to like build licks. You actually get a lot of benefits out of these things, and they're good to have as part of your practice, right? So as far as mapping goes, right? So knowing your fingerboard, as you play these exercises and you go between the G and then the F and G and F, if you can get your brain to actually shift between those two centers as you're doing it, like you think G and then you think F and then you think G, it's really good brain work. It's good mapping, because what you're doing is you're reiterating all the different parts of the arpeggios from different inversions and from different angles. So it's just super valuable from a mapping perspective of discovering your arpeggios. And it's all very more core mapping because everything's triads. As far as technique, a lot of good chop building because of all the crossing of strings and all the arpeggio work that you have to force your hands into. So you build some good chops while you do these as well. And then ultimately, you can use them, and that's great. So where in improvisation are these used? Well, anytime you have a dominant chord, especially one that I would say is more static. So when you have a chord, like let's say you're playing, let's say in bluegrass, kind of like a pedal, right? Right? So these are great for pedals. They're good for if you're playing like Sweet Georgia Brown. And it has these extended dominant. You need to have a bit of a length of time for these to make the most sense. The reason is the reason that you need more time is that you're trying to, for as far as building lines, you're trying to create these things that kind of weave through the chord, right? Because if you're just on a G7 forever, if you only have the core triad notes, you can get stuck, right? You can get stuck a lot of times. So you can start building these types of phrases. All right, so go down and let's take a peek. Christopher was asking in a direct message, does it cross over well to mandolin? Absolutely, yeah. The violin fingerboard and the mandolin fingerboard have a lot of similarities, especially since the book is a lot of lower position stuff. So it's a lot of things that you can carry through the rest of. You can eventually, once you understand them in first and some closed position stuff, you can move them around. So absolutely, it crosses over. Okay, so G and F. So let's go down and let's see this first one. So these types of patterns I was talking about, where you have two chords in mind and you're going back and forth, right? So let's give it a try. How many are readers versus need tabs? Or let me let's if you aren't the best reader, try to conceptualize it. That's another thing. A lot of these exercises can be done if you just understand the pattern. So the pattern is going up the G, and then we go down F. Okay, and then we do the same exact thing, but now we're on the B note of G, so the next inversion. Then we go to F. And you keep this pattern going. So let's try this all together. So from G, down F, now back to G, back to F, G again, and then F. And then we take it back down. And again, everyone probably has different pacing of how they need to work on these types of things, but I want to make sure more than anything, since you have the handouts, that the concept makes sense. Because once you understand that you have these two triad sets, and each different triad set will do different things. Like the G and F, the reason I have, like, if you look at that root, third, fifth, you get the 7, 9, 11. So it gives a certain sound as well when you play the F and G together in these different combinations. Right, so you can build a lot of different things with these triad pairs. So I want to make sure the concept is clear with everybody. So can you keep going down? So there's 3 different patterns, and these are the 3 patterns that I found the most useful to start unlocking something. So this one I call up, up, where you go up G, up F, right? And you kind of keep carrying that forward. Again, it's always just a back and forth. But you can see if you actually have to shift your brain between G and F, that's where the brain work and the fingerboard mapping work is really helpful. Because your brain eventually will say, if I'm going to have to memorize this, I should really just see these kind of as larger spreads that are overlapping on top of each other, which is hard to think about at first, but that's how I see the instrument. Is when I say G and F triads, I'm seeing like the full spread of G and F and overlapping on top of each other. Makes it much easier to go between them. And you can jump in, Isaac, if you have questions that you feel like other people might have.
Oh, this sounds good. Well, and I'm monitoring the chat box too. How do you know which triads, to play over which chords?
Okay, so that's a great question. So in this case, these are all ones that I gave 3 examples. So if you look at this, I guess in this I gave 2 examples, but in the book I gave 3. So the 3 most common that I heard other people do are basically so G and F. And again, whatever the chord you're playing, and this is mostly done over dominant chords, right? So if you're playing over a G7, G is one of the triads, so that's stabilizing it, and then you have another triad that you're kind of going back and forth between, and it gives a different sound depending on that triad. G and F, and that's this kind of. So it's really good too of like a sus chord. It's really cool in modal jazz too. And again, all that time I'm only going between G, F, G, F, G, F. So the other one is a G and an A. So if we go down a little bit, you'll see the G and the A. So when you do G and A, you get another kind of sound. It kind of creates this brighter. Again, it's over G, so when you play the A, you get a specific sound, right? You get certain extensions. You get certain bonus colors by playing the A. And you might ask, well, why not just think of this as like, why not just add, why do you have to think of the A versus, oh, the notes are sharp 11, so I just play sharp 11. The idea is when you start to go between the two, you can build a whole world of language that is just not possible of just going, oh, well, A gives me this note, so just think of that note, right? Well, you might just then go and just play the note, but the types of phrases you need the full confidence and practice of the 2 sets of triads to get the kind of weaving in and out of sounds. The third one in the book is a G and a D flat. which is a really cool sound, and it creates another whole, a little more outside the box, and you hear like a lot of people go like G, D flat, but what I do, I'll do a lot of different patterns, but again, it's G, D flat. You're creating different things. So that one, I don't know if I only kind of highlighted a few examples in this, but if that, oh, there it is. Yeah, so there's the start of G and D flat.
Yeah, it just starts, but there's no extra other page.
Yeah, so taking the different patterns, and so Dale says, well, how do you know which triads? Well, these three specific ones, G and F, G and A, and G and D flat, are probably the most commonly used. They have no common notes, so you're always voice leading in a cool, an interesting way. You don't have the common notes, but each one of these also gives, each of the other triad gives a color, and it gives you somewhere to go if it's a stable dominant chord. That other triad is important because that's the color, that's the tension and release. Yeah. And remember, there's two ways of thinking about dominant chords. One is a dominant chord that could last forever. In funk music, it's only dominant. Right? So that would be something that it's a dominant chord as the one. It's static. Or if you have, in Sweet Georgia Brown, for example, you have at least enough time to do these types of phrases. The other types of dominant chords are just kind of quickly going between maybe like a 2, 5, 1. These work, but they're not as applicable in that kind of setting, right? You can do it, but the whole idea is, from the improv standpoint, is to create lines within more of a dominant chord that's lasting a long time. And you say, well, if you only have licks that go from a 2, like a 2, 5, 1. If you only have those types of licks, you can't do that if you stay on the dominant, because you're resolving it to the wrong place, right? So the types of phrases that you want to build are going to be slightly different in an extended dominant. So these are really great because they kind of keep weaving, and they go a lot. You create a lot of different types of things.
So it adds a really nice structure, let me grab my mandolin, to that idea of playing over, like, for an extended period of time, some kind of dominant sound, because what you're saying is, like, the home key, like G, is the one that's like stabilizing it, right? And then, but what you're doing is it really adds, it's a pattern that adds a cool structure, right?
Yeah.
Because sometimes that's kind of what we're looking for when it's like, well, I don't know what to play because I don't have that idea for a structure. Something I was thinking of, though, or that it's, you know, my concept for, like, when I'm playing over a G dominant, I think about D minor 7 as being like that, basically that 2 minor 5 pair, because those chords are so similar.
Yeah, you get a similar sound for sure.
So you can basically if it's a G7 in a song that goes for one bar and then it resolves to a C, you could make that G7, you could break it up into like a half bar of D minor 7 and then a half bar of
Absolutely.
G.
So there's so many strategies for dominant chords. Dominant chords are the most fun things to explore, because that's where a lot of the color and the tension and the tension comes from, and also dominant chords are all over the place, right? So what you're saying is, like, there's a lot of different strategies. Like triad pairs gives you one type of phrase. There's substitutions. There's thinking of, like, instead of just the G7 going to C, you make it D minor. You can make it a 2-5-1, right?
Yeah.
Or you can just think of the two.
All of those, exactly. You could just think of, like, that playing over G7.
D minor, yeah.
Just think about D minor the whole time.
You could just do like a D melodic minor. Another one of my favorites over a G7. Yeah, there's a lot of good strategies for sure.
And really, when you're bringing in some kind of, like, substitution, it's just another way to think about well, all of the notes are there, right? But it's like a trick to give you this structure and like a new sound, you know, because if you're like,
Yeah,
oh, I don't really have much to say over this G7, but then maybe if you go for that F major, which is very similar to D minor 7, right? It's like the
absolutely. Yeah.
relative major, relative minor relationship. Those are the tension notes that the G7 needs to sound, to have that, you know, the magic notes, so like the things that bring tension, you know.
Absolutely. And one thing I just want to add, like the reason that these triad pairs are an integral part of the book is that the book is about developing a way of seeing the instrument where you have freedom. You see the chords, you see these shapes in a new way, in a deeper way. And so triad pairs are super valuable. You do get this all this like dominant language, but while you're practicing it, if you practice it effectively, you're building some amazing knowledge and fluidity, and you can apply like Dale asked, well, what triads? Well, you could also apply all these things to literally two chords in a song you're working on. All right, that's the other thing, is you're getting different ways. Like triad pairs gives you strategies between going between two triads. So even if, yeah, in one case we said, well, if it's a stable G, you need somewhere to go. So like G and F is great, you can weave. But what if the chords are actually G and F? Like there's a bluegrass song. The chords are actually G and F. Well, you're setting yourself up to be fluid with that too. Right? So triad pairs is also to practice the literal chords that you need to go between. It's also then interesting for these stable dominants where you're trying to go somewhere and weave. So that's why it's super valuable. And when you start to do this in different positions up the fingerboard, for example, like I remember this was, when you talk about those like aha moments, Isaac, and like these kind of things, I remember doing this exercise. I do put it in the book where I did. This was huge for me. I said, oh, wow. For the most part, I have my first finger on, I'm kind of moving this shape. These inversion shapes are moving within the triad pairs, right? If I didn't have triad pairs, I'll just show you. So if I didn't have triad pairs, it'd be, right? I'm basically moving the different inversions, which is really valuable.
If anybody doesn't understand what's happening, you're playing the arpeggio like a sequence of 4 notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 4, starting on the next note in that pattern every time.
Yeah. But once you do that, of course you have to do it with just saying in one key center, right? I call these staggered arpeggios, right? These groupings. These are really important to discover. And often you have your first finger, like Isaac was saying, like especially as you start moving around up the fingerboard, if you can have your first finger on one of those inversions, like the root, third, fifth, it's super valuable. And once you do the triad pair with that, you start to like really open up these possibilities of how the fingerboard's laid out. It really changed how I saw things, for sure.
That's a really good technique. Okay, so what you said, basically quoting me as saying like when your first finger is on like one of those arpeggio notes, the way, like that's true. I would say the way I really think about it is, it's not that I'm thinking about my first finger being on one of those arpeggio notes. I'm thinking if my first finger's on B, like if we're in G, then really what that means to me, that's the position when my second finger is on G. Like I am thinking about like what to do with my third finger on B, or my first finger.
Yeah.
But
so you could also have your second finger there. You could also have your third, right? So mapping isn't only to have your first finger. That's a really good strategy, to have your first finger on the, like within that shape. But like you said, you want to also be able to have your second. You know, so there's like expanding on these for sure, right? Based on where you are in the shape and where your finger lies. But for a lot of people, when they're just getting started, to not get lost and be like, wait, is it this, their second or third? If you can have your first finger and see that one octave shape. That's a really important thing because we have this ability to see a one octave. So it's really good for like improvising in a one octave range. Right? So if you have this like octave range within that, this is a really, really big thing. And I remember doing triad pairs and like trying to crawl up, really reiterated that too.
So this is really awesome. I'm going to say we have like time for, please, if anybody has any questions, submit your questions now. Or forever hold your peace.
Yeah. I want to make sure people kind of understand what they should be doing with those because they have the handouts. If someone's like, I'm completely lost, that's different than I just need to practice it. Like most people would say, I need years to just practice this, and it does take a long time. But if someone's like, none of this makes sense at all, I would want to backtrack a little bit. But I want to see where people are at. If it's mostly raise your hand if it's more like I just need to work on this. I get it. I need to work on it. That's where I'm hoping most people are at. Yeah. Cool.
Well, and before we leave, I was hoping you could show us just maybe like one cool lick in your All of Me etude.
Oh, yeah.
Just
I want to
maybe like, I don't know if it's going to be easy for you to identify like this is like the best one to show, but something that kind of
actually I have
basically
a few that
shows
like
a really nice structure for a jazz lick, like over swing tunes. That's
Absolutely.
got, because I'm sure that you could pick any two bars of your thing.
Recording
and it's
gonna... progress.
Yeah, pull it up.
Well, and I was gonna say, when I was sharing the document before, I don't think people could see you, right? Because it was just sharing the PDF. So I think I'm gonna see. Let me see about.
If you pin me, they can see both of us.
Is that how that works?
Yeah. So now I'm pinned. I think if you pull up the document...
You're pinned. I'm pinned too, so...
so we should be the squares like that everyone can see. Yeah, I think everyone can see me. I can see myself.
Beautiful.
Okay, so I would like to take a peek at a couple things here. The first one would be, let's see, that second bar over the A7, which goes like this. So let's play this
bar
again.
Number 6 for anybody.
This is A7 going to D minor, right? So you want to find phrases that flow nicely in a 5-to-1 setting because they're going to give you you get a lot of bang for your buck when you study 5-to-1 licks because they happen all the time, right? So this is, I'm actually isolating just that single phrase. Other stuff happens around it, right? But I'm isolating the core lick, which is this. Oh, and by the way, because this was originally violin, there are bowings, but if you're curious, I often will explore pull-ons like I would at bowing, and that's something that I for sure get from like hearing phrasing as a violinist. You don't have to do them, but it's interesting to explore, which would be. And it often the bowing and these pull-ons coincide with accents. So if I didn't do that, I could do. Right, so you want to find these good. Where you accent is so important. So often on offbeats for beboppy lines like this. But let's talk through it. So it's anchored off the third of the chord, third of A7, and then it goes up to the flat 9, right? Right? So this is one of those things like where you if you can play from the third of the chord, what Isaac was doing when he was doing it over he was going up to the ninth, the natural 9. You can also go to the flat 9. And then I target the third of D minor.
Phrase, if I can interject.
Yeah.
So you're starting with an arpeggio that's got those key notes that identify, that make it sound like an A7, right? like with the flat 9, the third and flat 9. But then the second group of like the on beat 3 and 4, that's like enclosing the F note preemptively, right?
Yes.
And so then you're finally landing on that F note, and that's what makes it sound like it went to D minor. That's that perfectly landing with, we talked about that, I don't know if you caught it, but like oftentimes, most often, when it's the next chord, you're landing with the note that identifies that chord exactly when it changes to the next chord.
Yes, exactly. So you want to find and build vocabulary of these types of phrases. And if you get this lick down and you want to come up with your own variations, that's great too. Right? You could delay the resolution to the F2. So you want to, again, take a lick, play it exactly, but then start coming up with your own twist, where you still have the core notes anchored off the third of the chord, goes up to the flat 9, lands on the third of D minor, right? So you could like print this out and circle those notes and see if you can play around with it, but always hit those particular targets. And there's a lot of different ways of doing it.
One last thought that I had about this phrase, your comment, it's like so valuable to learn that 5-to-1 thing. And I don't know if maybe everybody knew what that you meant, but basically the A7 is the 5 if you're in D minor, right? So those happen all over the place,
And it's how I think. I often think it's kind of like a movable do system. And without even thinking about solfege, like don't even overthink it. It's just the concept of like, okay, our big home key is C major, right? So it's almost like that's the city. C major is Paris, but there's all these little squares within it that we need to get to. So those are the other keys, like that are in the big city, but we're going there, and we need to go there with like a 5. If they have a 5-1, so like A7 heading to D minor is like you can give it, the D minor has the strength as if you're in that key.
Exactly. What I was thinking was that like it may not be obvious to everyone why A7. I mean, that's something you need to learn and study if you don't know that A7 is the 5th in the key of D minor. But like the better you get at playing over dominant chords, like where it goes to an A7 with a flat 9, it's so natural. It is the most natural thing you could do would be to go to D minor 7. Because basically what's happening when you do play over an A7 with a flat 9 is that all of those notes are coming from the minor scale of that minor chord that's coming up, like that it resolves to D minor, because it could basically be like a D harmonic minor, which has got like... So even when you're playing on A7 with the flat 9, the kind of internal tension and release that if you were just going to be playing over that, the whole time it's bouncing back and forth between this like A7 D minor, A7 D minor. I know that's kind of like getting more advanced, but that's really important to just know, like on a dominant chord, don't think about just the A7, because like think about the context, like A7 pretty much that's the dominant of D. So it's very easily going to resolve. It's just the most natural thing in the world to resolve the D minor.
Yeah, and a lot of standards are like puzzle pieces, right? So when you learn these little puzzle pieces, like A7 to D minor is a puzzle piece that could exist in a lot of different standards. So it's valuable to study these smaller groupings within the larger songs, because they will be parts of every standard. So I highly recommend when you learn a song like All of Me, yes, learn the whole song, try to memorize every chord progression, but break it into chunks that are valuable, these little puzzle pieces that these phrases and this exact progression could transfer into another song, and you'll see it. So that would be one. Has everyone got that lick?
You'll use that all the time when you play on A7 with a flat 9.
Yeah.
And then also transcribe that, or transpose that rather, to other exactly. Other keys.
Yeah, I mean that's another big part of building phrases, and it really helps your understanding of the original key you play it in if you actually take it through a lot of other keys. And there's this I'm even somebody I obviously I teach at Berkeley, and we talk a lot about moving things in all 12 keys, right? But I recommend 3 others as a starting point. This it overwhelms to say I have to do this in every key. Take 3 other keys that you said, I just played a song that had a D7 and to G minor. I should do that one. Oh, I just saw a song that had like E7 to A minor, right? Do it in keys where at first that you see in others, right? As soon as you say do everything in all 12 keys, unless you have a really, really good visualization of your fingerboard, it's a lot of practice time to do that. So I say at least 3 additional. That being said, if you are already somebody who does that, yeah, of course, all 12 keys is great, but don't feel like you lost if you only can do it in a few other keys, because you want to, if it's deep and you could use it in the 3 or 4 keys you have, great. That's an awesome start.
Well, Jason, that is great advice. This has been so much fun. You guys, we've really pushed the time. I know because we got started late, and so we went over a little bit. And thank you, Jason, for giving us just all this information and making sure everybody got something to think about, and something to
Absolutely.
Practice. Very great.
Yeah. I'll throw my email into the chat if anyone is curious and wants to stay in touch or wants to hear more about the book or anything. Reach out. And
Awesome.
thanks, Isaac, for doing this.
You bet.
How
man.
often are you doing this? Is this like a special thing, or are you trying to do a more regular?
I'm trying to make it more regular.
Nice.
I would say during the pandemic, that's when my efforts to just get more online business, or just more like online presence, like more growing my YouTube channel, and I kind of developed things for my website, instructional videos, and
Same here.
Yeah, right. Well, and now kind of what I'm going to call post-pandemic, I realized that was such a important thing for me moving forward, because I have found a community of people that are into like my style. That's like, you can't find it just in every city even. I mean, it's like hard to find people who do jazz on mandolin. So yeah. Basically, I decided, I did my first workshop like this in August, and then in September we had a baby, our second baby. So I wanted to do one even sooner, but then now I finally feel like we've had a little bit of like developing a routine, getting a little bit more sleep at night, and I was like, okay, it's time for another workshop. So I'm thinking in a couple months I would like to do another one. So I'll definitely keep. If I don't know how everybody heard about the workshop today, but if you're not following me on social media, like on Instagram or Facebook, or please give me a follow there, or subscribe on YouTube, because that's how I tell people about this stuff.
Yeah. That's great. This is it's a great group. I wish we were all in person. I'd love to be able to hear all of you guys and get to jam. But I think it's great what you're doing, Isaac, and it's awesome that you're all here. Everyone's at a different part in their journey, but have fun, enjoy practicing, even when it's challenging. If these triad pairs are difficult, have fun with it and enjoy it, and think of it as an interesting challenge and discovery. And it can be a lot of you can have fun while kicking your butt in the practice room.
Yeah,
I try to.
That's what I always try to encourage people with, is like, music is for everybody. Like, wherever your stage of development is, you can enjoy it. Like, even if you're just learning the basics and starting to get into like an intermediate, or like wherever your level is, it's just about enjoying it. And so it's fun for me, and I'm sure you feel the same, Jason, just to be able to share with people. It's just really fun to see people figure it out too, because we love music, and that's what it's all about.
Absolutely.
Well, with that, thank you, everybody. We're gonna call it a day, and I will send an email with the links to the recordings of the session, so everybody will have access to that for a week. Okay. Cheers, y'all.
Take care.
Thanks, Jason. See ya.
Bye. Thanks.